Good evening. Welcome to Investigator News, and I'm your host, Ellie, and we have William as co-host. And I don't know if we're all ready or not, but we've got lots of news. It almost feels like a Tuesday, but we got a lot of news, and I'm going to have William start off with what's up in Israel, and then he's got the let's see, fires in Texas. He's got uh, a big multi-country exercise over towards Taiwan. So, William, let's start off with Israel because I got big stuff too at the end.
Yeah, so Israel has pushed all the way up to Rafa now. They're just back in Khan Yunis doing mop-up operations. They're aiding the people of Rafa, the civilians, to move them north. And as they've set up a corridor to move them and usher them through, of course, there's been some Hamas fighters try to meld in with the civilians, and they've been able to capture a couple Hamas that way. Also, while they were involved in their non combat mission with the civilians, they were being surveilled. They noticed from a couple of buildings, so they were able to send in a force and capture a couple of Hamas spotters. So that's going on. At the same time, the Biden administration is trying to tell Israel that they need to prepare so that both Palestinians and Israel are going to be safe into the future, and that they'll have more autonomy, but not like a military autonomy, more of a civilian autonomy, and then their government will be then protected by the state of Israel rather than having to produce their own military. So that's going on. At the same time, Iran, the head of Iran, has greenlit a massive push south by Hezbollah out of Lebanon, and Israel has been preparing for some major combat operations with Hezbollah. They're not looking to go into Lebanon, but if Hezbollah pushes south, they'll engage them now, and if it's necessary, go into southern Lebanon just a small distance to create more of a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, so that anybody moving into that zone would become a military target. So that's going on, and that's not good stuff. That's what's going on with Israel right now. And, Netanyahu is saying, give us our hostages back. We want them.
145 days that our soldiers our Americans have been held hostage.
We got two U.S. citizens.
And I think it's 145 days they've been held.
Right, and that's Israel's number one objective. Their second one is to degrade Hamas until it can't come back. Degrade Hamas military arm
now,
it cannot.
I just have to say with Israel that, Hamas, but they're going to have to do the same to Hezbollah. They're just going to have to. They'll just
so
join
I have
forces.
Opinions on that.
Throw popcorn at me.
The problem with running ground operations into southern Lebanon is you've got southern Syria right beside it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you push in, say, to cities. Now you've got you could get pinched between Syria and the ocean, right? And get pinned. So I don't think Israel's going to want to go far into Lebanon. I think they just want the hostilities to stop.
Well, you know, if you really look at it, it's not really Hezbollah against Israel. It's Hezbollah against our bases, our military bases.
No, it's Hezbollah against the civilian population primarily, and then secondary against Israel northern bases. And see, those people are still evacuated. They haven't been able to go home this entire time.
No.
Along Gaza, those folks have been able to go home. So they've not been able to go home, tend to their farms, you know, and Hezbollah is using that as a leverage to, if you will, degrade Israel. They can't really weaken Israel, but they can degrade Israel. All right, where do you want me to go next?
The fires in Texas.
Oh my God. Yeah, we've got 3 counties in the panhandle of Texas. We've got the second biggest wildfire going on in the state's history. It involves 3 counties. It's spread into Oklahoma. Initially, the number of acres that were burned were at 500,000, 500,000, but that's gone up now to 850,000. Let's see. They've lost homes. They've lost 3 in Bear County, 1 in Rogers Mills County, and 9 in Ellis County, according to the Oklahoma Emergency Management. Now, in Texas, in Gray County, they've got people that they're asking to shelter in place. Others are being evacuated, especially according to Troy Swargraff, Emergency Management for coordinator for Pampa City in Gray County. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, they're trying to get people out of the way as fast as possible, unless they're like in a city area that's not as likely that they can fight back, right? And then they want people to shelter in place and try to stay out of that air. So that's what's going on in Texas. It's really, I guess it's a really fast-moving grass fire. They've lost lots of cattle, lots of fencing. And, you know, this is the time of year that Texas has historically had fires on their prairies. So, yeah.
Okay.
It's worse. The worst part is for the cattle because they can't get out of the way. They're trapped.
Unfortunately. Now, moving on to this great big exercise that we have going on. Now, I only thought it was just a few of them getting together, but it sounds like you got more info than I do on it.
So it's a U.S. Thailand invitation to the Southeast Asian countries to come and exercise with them. They're going to be using land forces. They're also doing beach assaults. They're involving Indonesia, I would suppose Philippines, South Korea. I would expect something happening from Japan as well. So
I think that's what I seen was Japan and the Philippines and us, and I can't remember who else.
Well, what surprised me is it was Thailand, and the invitation was from Thailand.
Was it?
I would expect it out of Indonesia, but Thailand was a little bit of a surprise to me. Remember, Thailand's right next to Cambodia, where China's put in those ports.
Yeah, well, not only that, but they're starting to put policing forces on a lot of those places like Solomon Islands or Easter Islands, Guam, a few of them. They're starting to load them up with like not only the ports but and military, but
Yeah, they
police
really want to
force.
get hold of the Northern Marianas, but we've been able to keep them basically out of Northern Marianas. But there's really three island chains, and they would really like to get out into that third island chain between the United States and Hawaii.
And if Taiwan did this, this is almost like a preparation. I know it's an annual get together for the most part, but if Taiwan did this, I'm seeing a pre-run exercise in
Well,
case
the idea is that
practice and
any force
practice.
in
So
Southeast,
that
any of the Allied forces in Southeast Asia could get together, and they know how that each other functions, so that they can have not just their country fighting one part of the war and another country fighting the other part of the war, but actually integrate. So if there's a weakness in some part of, let's say, uh, uh, South Korean, this is just all hypothetical, but if there's some weakness in their forces, we could fill in that weakness in their forces and at the same time be able to work beside their forces, and instead of having a weaker and a stronger force, have two absolutely strong forces, because we already know how each other engages in land warfare. You need to know what rank structures are, who's in charge. There's a lot that goes into land warfare. Communications is the biggest thing, and I'm not talking about between officers. I'm talking about the guys out on the front line, so they don't lose advantages. If you push into some place offensively and you lose your momentum, pretty soon you can be overrun by defensive forces. And so what they try to do is make sure they'll be able to stay strong by integrating forces between the countries.
right.
So they understand how our weapons work. We understand how their weapons work. We understand which ammunition, is interchangeable between our weapons. All this is stuff we need to know. How their grenades, the timing of their grenades, the concussion, that sort of stuff, ours timing, all this stuff may be different, and they may have to use whatever weaponry is available, right? And so everybody needs to understand each other's operations.
Yeah.
So that's going on. That's really a good thing.
Yeah.
That's going to be a long.
And, well, at the same
exercise.
time, it kind of spews into, well, not really spews into it, but we're having the Pentagon announced they were going to cut the Army's ranks by an incredible 24,000 soldiers. Now, this went all over the news today. Everybody would start freaking out. I called William. I said, William, they're cutting them. And so not so fast on this, because the Army is not asking current soldiers to leave or eliminating them as the Army builds back and strengthen over the next few years. Most installations will likely see an increase in the number of soldiers actually stationed. Now, William, you know more about this too, so.
Yeah, so they're going to cut 32,000 special operations area slots, right? But these are holes; they're not faces, right? And they're taking other people from special forces and moving them into, instead of special forces units, integrating them into land force operations. So these guys have lots of extra skills they can share with average land forces. And so they're putting the strength of special operations with I guess you'd call it our forces. So in the past we've fought these little skirmishes, really, right, with helicopter support and air support. This is different. This is more like land warfare from World War II. So like we had in Desert Storm. So the military goes in cycles, all right? They have financial cuts, and then they deal with those to try to keep the force strong. But then they have new threats come aboard, and they have to refocus the military on the next job they expect to have at hand. And that's what they're doing right now. And not only they're doing this is involving the Air Force, the Space Force, the Army, and the Navy. All right. They're recalibrating how they're going to interact together if we have to get involved in a full-scale war with, tanks and the whole business.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are now in the Pentagon going through all the previous doctrines to pick up the types of doctrines of warfare that are most useful with the weapons they now have at hand. Remember, military has to go to war with what they have at hand.
Right.
It's not what they're going to have into the future. It's what you got now is what you go to war with. So they can be able to use all their weapons in a way and such that they get a bigger bang, if you will, for the buck.
Right.
By having force multipliers, by integrating air units directly with ground units. So they're responsible for, their very own grunts, if you will. Things are changing that way. And even how the Air Force, the Air Force has an F-16 squadron, it has a B-52 squadron, it has a tanker squadron. And these squadrons went to war together. Well, now they're setting up packages. So you've got tankers, you've got bombers, you've got tactical fighters, you've got weasels, you've got
now get this. I think Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, after 83 days, is putting the 400 Osprey tilt rotor aircraft back in the air. Now, you remember the last one they had, I believe, November. They had an accident where it killed 8 service members. But they're saying that the Air Force knows that they failed in the Osprey, but they still, get this, William, they still don't know what happened. But they're going to put it back into the air because we must use what we have. It's just exactly what you just said. We got to use what we got.
They also went through to safety functions. You have checklists you have to go through for each flight. You've got your pre-flight, you've got your takeoff flight, what you do if there's an emergency, how the captain's going to interact with the co-pilot, who's going to be in charge of radios, who's going to be in charge. See what I'm saying? And then if there's emergency in the air, the places along their route that they believe they can put down safely, right? So where there are wires, there are things that can tangle up an aircraft where there aren't stuff. And so that everybody in the aircraft, if there's emergency, can act instantaneously. They don't have to think about it. They've already thought about it. So they just react as quickly as they can. So some of that had had become not as strictly adhered to, right? And so that was part of the safety standouts. At the same time, all the maintenance crews were going through the aircraft. Now, they're not just looking for things that aren't functioning well, mechanisms, but now they're looking for cracks, right? They're looking for their X-raying aircraft. They're looking for the things that catastrophic failures that they typically couldn't see because it's part of some deep internal part, right? So they took that time to go through all those. So we're probably not going to see problems with the Ospreys, but we just had another crash with a regular single rotor aircraft, and now those guys are going into a stand down. They're trying to assess what exactly happened there, and once they find out exactly what happened, then they'll go back through their fleet of that type of aircraft and make sure they don't have that problem again. So that's a basic stand down safety procedure they always go through, right, when they have these accidents, so that it doesn't happen again. And then these things are written right into the doctrine, how they function day to day. The rules that you use on an aircraft are literally written in blood.
Yeah.
But that's how they find out what went wrong. And so all these tilt rotor and rotor aircraft, they're mostly run by the Army themselves, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the Army has some and the Marines have some. Air Force is mostly involved with fixed wing aircraft.
Yeah.
Navy has some rotor aircraft they keep out on their ships.
Yeah. So
okay.
Now North Korea's first spy satellite is alive. It can maneuver now. They say that let's see, it can maneuver. It can raise its perigee or the lowest point in its orbit to 497 kilometers. And they say that they can get U.S. data and led Combined Space Operations Center. They can even get info from that. So they're announcing they've got this satellite that can spy, and it can maneuver, which everybody was saying it couldn't. So yep, it's up there, and it had William, I think it had 2 failures, is what I have down in notes. And so
remember, satellites, they can't refuel, so they only can use that maneuvering on a few occasions. So that they don't want to waste that stuff. So it's not like something that can just keep moving around through the heavens doing destruction, right? They can, and what they do is you can put satellites up in a spherical orbit around the Earth, but you can also set them up in an elliptical Earth orbit. And if you put them in an elliptical Earth orbit, you can transfer through different shells, if you will, different orbital tracks of different satellites. And I think that's what they've done. Is they put up an elliptical orbiting satellite, so it gets closer to Earth, it gets farther from the Earth, it gets closer to Earth, it gets farther from Earth. Well, when you do that, you also need to be able to maneuver, because you'll get closer and closer to the atmosphere, and eventually they'll have to avoid that. So, yeah, it can maneuver itself, but it also will probably have to maneuver itself to save itself, not just, do spying.
Now we got, now this is, I mean, of all places, Hawaii. We got Germany going to put some embassies over there. But then we had the United States on Monday cautioned Pacific Island nations against, and I was telling you about this earlier, security forces that Chinese police are working in remote nation of Kiribati. It's a neighbor of Hawaii.
Is it Kiribati?
It says Kiribati.
Kiribati, okay, yeah.
Kiribati. Let's see. I'm gonna.
So you've got a lot of different island nations out, like Tonga, Fiji, the Samoan Islands. You've got independent Samoa. You've got American Samoa. They're going to try to alienate the United States from these islands as much as they can. So here's one of their strategies. Their strategy is if we can get the United States distracted in enough directions, we can weaken them, right? So we can break them down. We can break them down by information. We can break them down through economic trade. We can break them down through diplomacy. We can break them down through integrating our forces with other nations. So
the big thing is they say
China.
It's kind of important because it's one of the world's biggest exclusive economic zones, covering more than 3 million square miles of the Pacific. Now it hosts a Japanese satellite tracking station, and China has announced plans to rebuild a World War II military airstrip on Kiribati's Canton Island. So even though Japan is there, and we got Germany moving over to Hawaii, moving closer to kind of keep an eye on these guys, but now we're starting to see China move closer and around Hawaii. I think
So
that's
that's
what they were.
basically what they're trying to build there is a non-floating aircraft carrier. If they wanted to attack Hawaii, they couldn't get far enough. You can fly from one place to another across the Pacific. That's one thing. But flying across the Pacific, dropping bombs and flying back, that's something entirely different. That takes twice the fuel. But if you can find an island that's midway, put a fuel dump and an aircraft and a defensive perimeter on it, well, now you can make a first strike someplace out there in the Pacific, wherever you want. It gives you options. So they're going to do that. You have to expect them, and we should be doing the same thing.
Yeah. Did you miss anything or have anything else before we get into this thing with Ukraine?
Yeah, we had 18 strikes on the Houthis in Yemen. They primarily targeted launchers, um, fuel dumps, military weapons depots, stuff like that. Not particularly individuals, but yeah, we had 18 strikes between the United States and the UK. They were both ship to shore and air, using air power.
Yeah. Now, last night, William, you talked about stuff with Dan Bongino and the CIA in Ukraine, but it's also the FBI, though. Now, man, I've looked into this for so long, and when I started listening to what Dan Bongino was saying, I was like, oh my goodness, I know quite a few um, uh, journalists or people like Dan Bongino, where I bet the wheels are spinning. If they did anything back to um, the beginnings of what we were doing in Ukraine to begin with. Now that was as
Well, they're starting to realize the Ukraine problem started.
But yeah, I'm going to explain it to everybody and, be shocked because, with Trump, all he did was win an election. And he found out a massive machinery of the federal government with the ability to do what they're doing to him today. And it's not just by, everybody says, well, it's that governor in New York, it's that DA in Georgia. No, there's a lot behind this, folks. This was well planned, very well planned. And
remember that 50, 20 or 50 signature letter about the fact that Hunter's laptop was faked by all those intelligence agencies.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this goes back to John Brennan.
Oh yeah, boy, the stuff I have here.
Yeah.
Because it makes this way worse than even Watergate. Watergate looks like, just a trickle under the bridge.
Goes all the way back to Cheney and that Darth Vader guy, right?
Now, the intelligence community and law enforcement community with the United States, it goes to the highest levels of weaponization against anybody that was going to break up this plan that they started. And a lot of people don't understand. We've been sending millions of dollars to Ukraine since 2003. Now, you say, now who was in power in 2003? That was Bush. But I'm going to go with you with Cheney and Newland. I think Cheney and Newland had their eyes set on, for one, Ukraine. But, starting a war in Iraq, and it was only to start making a thoroughfare for terrorists that were trained in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And a lot of people think what I'm going to go over tonight is kind of dead and buried, but I got to bring it back up because the thing is, folks, this plan that they're going through, and they're going through the motions. This was it was kind of like a manifesto that Hillary had written up through her lawyers, which ended up starting the whole Russia collusion story. Now,
as well as the Arab Spring.
Yeah, as well as Arab Spring. Now, Obama administration got completely comfortable with the idea of abusing government. And what I say by that, because remember I told you the State Department was full of um, these operatives like Newland and a few others. I'm going to say John Kerry and Mr. George and all of NGOs or the banking system, the everything they could abuse and power. The State Department, the FBI, the CIA, all of this you'll find in Ukraine, but not just Ukraine, folks. It's I think that they started there and they found out it worked. So they're doing it. They want to do this to Russia and they want to do this to China and also to Iran. The only problem is Russia is fighting them. So they're going to have to depend on, and you'll see that what's coming out in the news today is Biden doing business in China. It started in Ukraine. And so, really, this was a hatched plan, a manifesto of sorts. And yeah, everybody says, well, yeah, they got Trump really good. Well, in the manifesto, it says a Republican president. And what do I mean by that? Um, uh, it would have been
It
anybody.
could have, right.
It's a Republican because they didn't know if Ted Cruz was going to get in. That was another fear of theirs, is Ted Cruz. So if it would have been Trump, it would have been Cruz. But would Cruz be able to fight these lawsuits right now? And but when they started, um, when Obama started, he had to make some changes. So he had to hit up the NSA database first. That's where you get um, what's his face that came out of the NSA. Is a
Michael Haidt.
Him and the other one that's real famous. It's in
Oh, there's so many I can't keep
no,
track
it's
of
a big
them all.
one. He was a whistleblower that came out of Russia, in Russia right now, that they wrote a big thing on. Oh my gosh! And he's the one that he was a whistleblower for databases of them spying on um, not only us but the Trump team and oh gosh, I wish I could remember his name. Anyway, so he found out he could change policies. Now we know how Biden had all them where he signed stuff in. Well, Obama did it. He just didn't do it in public. He signed a bit, and then of course there was all the ones he signed in the Oval Office. Come to find out, and the NSA, he manipulated the NSA database and a whole boatload of information, metadata um, if, that came out of it. And
That was that admiral that told Trump that he was being surveilled. Is that who you're talking about?
it's kind of well, see, and then we found out they had spied on Trump Tower, and they had to leave there, but they also did the same thing to the White House, um, and certain offices that he had all over D.C., but not only D.C., but even Trump Tower out of New York. So they were bound to listen to find out what he knew because why? Because of what they had done. And it starts back to Cheney. And
Hide it is to accuse the person you don't want to find out of doing what you're doing. Because they'll be so busy defending themselves, they won't realize that that's actually what they've been doing themselves.
yeah, because see, they were targeting really. They said foreigners and query information. This is that with the database they wanted to use. But what I found out is who was behind it, and that was Brennan, it was Newland, it was Cheney, Kerry, and a handful of Democrat senators and congressmen. But not only that, they used the CIA and the FBI, not just in Ukraine, but most countries not only are allies but are enemies. So it gave them the ability to spy and do what they wanted. But the same thing is they started listening on our stuff to be able to. This is where we're getting Facebook, community standards, where they could start controlling what we were saying. And that's where the First Amendment's being attacked right now. That's kind of the underlining things for that. But they wanted intelligence surveillance on the court system. And do you remember who Mike Rogers was?
Yeah, Mike was the admiral that went and told Trump that Trump Tower was bugged. And you have to realize the tactics they're using here are classic CIA tactics. These aren't diplomatic tactics. These are nasty, dirty tactics.
Yeah.
Right? So keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, so now remember this, everyone, because this is when they were able to start slipping the CIA into secret bases for secret offices around the country. So that's where you would find, why we're just now finding out that they were in Ukraine and a bunch of them. But see, they're doing it everywhere else too. They've done it in Iran.
Right.
You have to look at. Go ahead.
They had dark. They called them dark. What did they call them? They were like dark prisons where they would interrogate people. They had like 7 of them around the world. I think one was in Thailand or Laos or something like that. Then I guess they had one in Ukraine, and they were trying to snatch up these terrorists and question them before they were brought into the U.S. civil court system or the military court system. So it was real nasty business.
And, at the same time, now we're talking Obama was doing this. And not only that, the foreign intelligence, they wanted to surveillance, but also our court system. And that never made sense to me, that why are they now, the federal government has the ability, and that's when they start putting the cameras in the courtroom so they could hear what was going on. Well, it was to point out who were the good judges, who were the bad judges, come to find out. There is, so the NSA was being queried by private contractors working with the FBI and the CIA. So that's where you would get these private contractors. But not only that, then it would be the NGOs where they could come up with these offices. But all these offices were considered spy. They had CIA there, FBI there, or NSA or NSI. So, if you bring in the CIA and FBI and the politicians and Obama and the State Department even, the NGO activists, the lobbyists, and then, we had the Fusion GPS. And I'm trying not to confuse anybody, but there's a lot of info I have. So this is all part of what they call the deep state. Now, there's more to the deep state, but this is what Obama was doing now, and with Biden as vice president. And so, when we look at Ukraine, and it's not just to spy on Trump back then, because Trump wasn't in office in 2003, and we were setting up these spy things in Ukraine. And what they were doing was keeping an eye on the oligarchs. And of course, we had our senators and congressmen going over there a lot. And as I get going, you'll see that, the United States kind of felt sorry for Ukraine. So Obama wanted to start helping them. And the same way with Libya, the same way with Yemen, Iran. Wherever we're giving aid or helping them, Afghanistan, look what we did for Afghanistan.
Iraq, Iran.
as all CIA. We send them over in these little groups, and they hire these groups. Now, a good example of that is Libya, when they had the big where the ambassador died. That was all CIA. They had CIA over there, and the people that got stuck there, the men that was on the roof, um, most of the people that worked at that base were all CIA, FBI spies, or a type of group. And then, of course, they had these, huh?
Or mercenary contractors.
Right, trained by the CIA.
Right.
So realize that, folks, and that's in Libya. So that kind of shows you how the CIA and Obama used it. You know, what was it Hillary said? We came, we conquered, and then giggles about it. So that's how they feel about this. And who did they kill? But most of it, William, was civilians. It wasn't really um, Houthi or anybody of their soldiers or the terrorist or the unruly there. It was mostly
so none of possible pre um, Desert Storm. Desert Storm showed how strong our military was.
Mm-hmm.
Then you had right afterwards you had the Soviet Union collapse. Then we're chasing nukes all over Eastern Europe, right? The collapsed Soviet Union, trying to get them back to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, while all this was happening, and then we had the strike on the towers. When we had the strike on the towers, it gave us the go-ahead to
Mm-hmm.
start setting up all this stuff that never existed before. Because we were already having to sweep through these areas, and so somebody got enterprising and said, well, hey, we're using this to save Europe from a nuclear Armageddon or some small countries from tossing nukes at each other. Why don't we use this as perhaps move towards more control over the United States as well?
And what it was to cause like a modern day communism in these countries. Now, I don't know if they were planned anything with China or Iran or any of these leaders to push communism, but for the most part, it's socialism around the world, and that was one of the things that they wanted to push the social programs into communist kind of programs, not only in Venezuela, but in Ukraine, come to find out. So as Venezuela was crumbling, so was Ukraine. And that was, and they couldn't let this happen. This group with Obama couldn't let Ukraine fall. And so that's where they started first sending them money to help them out. Now they didn't do it for Venezuela, of course, but there was something about.
Also, at the same time, the military was terrified. Well, not terrified, but concerned because Georgia was annexed by Russia, and so then the next concern is what are they going to do with their neighbor Ukraine? Belarus is more sympathetic. So they had good reasons to be there, but with the good reasons, some bad leaders, and we know Brennan he went through his security checks. They asked him if he's a communist. They said yes, and they're like, okay, well, he told the truth. And he finally becomes the leader of the CIA. It's just craziness.
Yeah, and then a lot of it, that's when they were bringing in Mr. George. Now, realize in 1990, they did the Open Society. That's George's thing. And they created this group called the IRF, the International Renaissance Foundation. You remember that? And they opened it in the UK and Ukraine. So he had this over in UK, but he also opened a big office in Ukraine. That was in 1990, folks.
And you got to keep in mind, this wasn't just, you had office leaders and senators that were trying to do the right thing, and then you had staffers that were working against them right in their own offices. So it's like you had President Bush trying to do the right thing at the Oval Office, and you had these other folks trying to do things that were other than what they needed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Victoria Nuland just really fell into this with the Cheneys. You know, Cheney's the one that recruited her.
And after 4 years after this IRF with Open Societies, they sent Ukraine $14 million. So that was in 94. They got $14 million from Open Societies.
Ukraine had only been a free country for 3 years. They were in terrible poverty.
Mm-hmm.
When the Soviet Union fell, all these people were next to starvation.
Okay, now since then, he does give Ukraine.
There's a list of nations in military hierarchy. There's a list of types of deprivation, and they were like 2/3 down the list. They were really suffering, and so a few $1 million was a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Well, every 3 years, 4 years, I'm sorry, they Open Society sends Ukraine another $8 million in funds from this group, the IRF and the Renaissance Foundation. But see, now it goes through Ukraine, UK, and Ukraine, and the UK also is giving them funding also. So you could see that these groups, they can put thousands, if they wanted to, they could create thousands of banks in Ukraine to receive any of this money that goes to Ukraine, as long as it's like a funded, licensed donation group. So
remember, all these countries were wild,
and that's what they now
right?
Understand. They've done that here too. The Sunshine Group. He's got probably 40 different entities here that he pours money into. That it pays for them, like some of the protests and BLM and others. But now I don't want to get too far off of this because I'm trying to show the CIA and what the plan, what they did to Ukraine. Now, what it ended up with, and you mentioned it last night, Naboo, William. But see, this was a creation about 10 years into what Soros was doing with the Renaissance. So then it changed over, and it was all of that was instrumental into creating Naboo. And so now you see this Soros group create what they decided to do is to show good faith. They decided to do a national anti-corruption bureau in Ukraine. It's one of the first ones, but it was only him or the society, Open Societies. It was Nuland. Then it went to Cheney at this point. So Nuland and Cheney and John Kerry and the State Department, and
Hillary Clinton was
well, yeah,
involved,
she was a big part of it, but that was the creation of Naboo, and also who was a part of this, and what came out of it in 2003 was the starting of Burisma with Joe Biden and his son. So we had all that money going in, and the State Department knew what was going on. The State Department started sending the CIA in there. They knew that these oligarchs were crooked. They knew the president was crooked, and they still moved in. And it was so crooked, they put in the um,
Corruption.
But by the time Trump got in office, they had three of them. Trump put in the fourth because the other three weren't doing anything. They weren't looking into it, and neither were they going after the corrupt presidents that ran away with billions of dollars.
So when the collapse happened, it created all kinds of oligarchs because they got hold of things through unions like, manufacturing facilities or gas facilities or whatever sector of the economy that was growing, right? And so all of these people were getting rich, and they were getting rich because the United States was allowing them to do this, right? And then you had senators, and you had NGOs, you had staffers, all going out into these areas and getting involved with these businesses. It was a boom because taxpayer dollars were going in to stabilize the societies. At the same time, they're building their very first free corporations, and guess who's getting on the boards?
Yep. And now in 2016, there was this. It was called Black Ledger. It was kind of a fake thing, but it was when the law enforcement NABU, they're the ones that launched this until Paul Manafort took a look, and he claimed that the Black Ledger was showing money that from the United States, not only going to Ukraine but Iran and I believe it was China where they were doing
also
business.
Russia at the time.
Yeah, and see, it was showing their statements. You remember those statements? We want to see that what Ukraine is getting. Let's see the statement of everything they're getting and how much and what they're using it for. I believe this is part of that Black Ledger. But when Paul Manafort from the Trump team, and he wasn't really in the Trump team, I think he was whoever paid him the most money, that's where people tend to go. So get this. One of the first things with the Black Ledger and NABU was sending information about more of politicians and CIA and FBI coming to Ukraine because this post came out of Kyiv, and this was in August of 2016. But everybody said this Black Ledger was.
The FBI was there, Ellie. The FBI was there because they were setting up Interpol for the new Eastern Free Nations of Europe. All right, and so they were involved with helping international law enforcement. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, so a lot of it was made up as a Democrat operation funneled through Ukrainian law enforcement for NGOs and Mr. George's money groups. And they all worked together with the FBI and the CIA. Why? Because when Trump first went in office, he let go. I think it was 50 CIA, 50 FBI, and I think close to 100 NSA and some in NSI. And when everybody had moved up, it didn't touch corruption, he said, was one of the statements that Trump made. And then we also heard it through, I think 60 Minutes in Australia mentioned it, and quite a few others, Glenn Beck and Dan Bongino. So that's what they were starting to do. And this was before Trump, where they were setting all this up and everything to be put in place. And then Burisma, like I said, happened. I don't think it was necessarily to protect Burisma. I think it was a further plan for Ukraine in a whole.
It was really opportunistic by senators. You had, what was the name of that senator that ran for office? McCain. So McCain was involved with it. So they
Yes.
go over there, they make money, and then they would come back to the United States and try to buy up all the land, say in Arizona or something like that. And that's where you get Mr. Hodges. He fought that.
Right. You
And
know, one of
so
the biggest companies that started up, I think Cheney did it. I think McCain was even behind this. But you remember Halliburton?
right, Halliburton was Cheney.
And there was
And
one
then
of the
you
biggest
had-
offices that was set up in Ukraine. Why?
Then you had ExxonMobil. That was Bush.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So these are all opportunities to go over there and explore for oil. It was just an economic free zone where you could basically do almost anything you liked as long as you had the upfront money. And where was the upfront money coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Was it coming from ExxonMobil? It wasn't coming from Halliburton. It was coming right from the U.S. government taxpayer.
And it was a lot of it was to take over and stop the. It was to bring in the new Green Deal, and that was in 2014. So what it's supposed to do is Halliburton would take over oil and gas and the pumping, the fracking, because they were doing fracking here in Arkansas. Because I was seeing Halliburton trucks all over Conway. They were going up north and they were
Halliburton
fracking.
is a corporation. I don't know if people know this. They take bids from the U.S. government, all right, and they will construct, build, create anything from an organization to a construction company to oil drilling. Anywhere the money is, they will morph into something that's useful for the government to get a contract. And Cheney's right involved with it. You got Rumsfeld involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And that was
just what they were doing
pre-Obama.
behind the back of the American people.
And see, that was pre-Obama. And then we had, like you said, Desert Storm. Well, when the reins were handed over to Obama, he kind of did what, I mean, it's almost equal to what Biden just did in Afghanistan. They just left everything. And everybody's saying, what are you doing? You just gave them a whole bunch of equipment to the terrorists. And then, Biden did the same thing, almost like a copycat of what was done and that Obama did. So when I looked into
they
it,
make money from instability in the region.
Mm-hmm.
So if you leave a bunch of equipment and you've got people that have, dislike each other, whatever, they'll get the equipment, create an army so that they can get what they want. That instability leaves opportunities to make money for these, senators and people who've left office.
Mm-hmm.
And even lobbyists were making a lot of money this way.
And that was the bringing in of the spy drones. And they also, we went through the whole thing with Obama blowing up people or blowing up the wrong things with these drones. And they were actually supposed to be just spy satellites, so they can get as close as they could to anything. That's where they created the bugs and the smaller ones up to the big ones, and more using them. So American people got them, and the drones are everywhere now. But then it's not going to surprise you if a drone decides to spy on you and take information. It's able to,
or accidentally try to go after a terrorist and end up getting, a corporate leader.
Right. So, at this point, they were starting to get caught up in that, Obama, because I looked into Obama and just found all this stuff, all this information, and all this is documented.
This all functioned under an aegis called plausible deniability.
Right. And so they had to come up with something different. And that's when they started buying up the old chemical offices, for pharma and nuclear weapons and everything for to start putting people in place. Like Fauci had a lab over there. So it was, these pharma labs. And I heard there's 8. I've heard there's 10. I've heard there's 5. I can't get no definite how many there are. But they took over them. Now, one of them had a basement. And I think that, William, this is what happened with this recent thing, is when it collapsed and they found the CIA base underneath. And they started finding paperwork and documents to show that, these do have basements, but they're being used by the United States because they're bought by the United States, folks. So, is it weird? Well, the administration, oh no, nothing to see here. But the big thing that they started doing was um, that's kind of when the Minsk agreement came out. And I know I mentioned that a lot. So they decided they were really going to jump on it. And this is where Obama felt very, very sorry for the conditions of Ukraine. So he decided to help them. And there was, I believe, first 1 million that was sent over there. And it wasn't long after that that you start getting into the Russia collusion thing. But to keep everybody, let's not look over there. Look at how successful the Biden family is with Burisma. And of course, there was, uh, he met with Devin Archer. And not only that, but John Kerry's son was a part of this. So was John Kerry.
The Heinz of his wife from Heinz.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing was John Kerry was kind of setting up the same type of situation in Iran. His daughter's son lives there. So he set up kind of a thing like Burisma over there, working with Iran. And this is what we're getting that Devin Archer had to say. So now we're starting to see um, Kerry starting to go to Ukraine and Iran, because you remember we always see him go to Iran, and Iran was okay. And then the pallets of money started going to Iran. Folks, William, do you ever notice this? Let's say like Ukraine, or even other countries, they say we need aid for our people. Well, and we say no, okay? And then they say we need 1 million for military to protect ourselves. And then we're okay with that. What happened to asking for aid for the people? I think I think when they do this, William, it's not about the aid. It's about the money that they can get.
Right. That's exactly what's going on. So they end up taking foreign aid, USAID, World Bank loans, and the people get started with their industry or their businesses or what have you, building a military. But a lot of this money gets siphoned back off to political action committees, NGOs, that then funnel money back to these senators or whatnot so they can run for office. A lot of these donations that are coming are actually things that money that has been put through a money laundering process. They're actually tax dollars.
Yeah. And so Obama, like I said, is kind of feeling bad, and I guess he's going to ride in on the white horse to save the day. I don't know, it could be a black horse. And to use U.S. aid. Now, U.S. aid, and they farmed it out because there was so many open society in Ukraine that was smart to put the U.S. aid to open societies to distribute. Now, that included $1 billion sovereign package. Then it was $320 million in general assistance. And then we sent $118 million in equipment and training for security forces. And then it was $20 million for new law enforcement and reform a fleet of advisors in banking and politics. And they opened up a string of banks. And so this is Obama, folks. This is Obama and Biden. Biden's buying up what he can.
They were going to do the same thing in Libya, but they had an uprising, and that didn't happen. But they wanted the oil out of Libya, and they were going to set up the banks and do Ukraine 2.0.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I call it the Clinton trial run because, the Clintons were a big part of this too. Now, what they wanted to do is energy, media, and human rights. And human rights was to say that Putin was overstepping his boundaries with his mercenaries fighting Ukraine mercenaries. So they decided to, in 2015-16, to jump in and start a smaller war, but it was more like a civil war. And then, of course, we sent an additional 20 million to them for that.
Ellie, they would send foreign aid to them, and they would basically allow them to use 50% for good things like, they wanted to use it for. But then there was that other 50. It's always a 50-50 thing, right? So we're doing a good thing, but there's also the dark thing on the side. So that was all. That's how you gain the plausible deniability.
And it almost become like a giant piggy bank there because they had banks. They had they had all these different banks to choose from. Some were Mr. George and Open Societies, and some were just other banks. To where
you probably heard in the 90s and early 2000s, they talked a lot about slush funds.
Yep.
That's where that came from.
Right, and then I think Burry Smy, he also had a bank, opened a bank there that was working with the DNC, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry. They were going to use it for money to go there, so John Kerry could help his the people in Iran with the same thing they were doing in Ukraine, but quietly, because we knew the whole plot behind Iran. I mean, they even just got done with the hostages, and they were still wanting to help Iran, and we paid for those hostages. They just weren't released. We paid for those. And so this guy here, he put into a bank a donation of 1.8 billion to Ukraine that went to a bank that could be used by this NGO to they could funnel it pretty much to Iran if they wanted to, or Yemen, anything in these banks. They could do it in the guise of aid or help for countries, especially Ukraine. And when we're looking at it,
they had to have a way to disperse the funds in country, and so these banks grew up.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where we're looking at quite a few banks.
Remember those Islamic banks where they've come in, they'd send money, and then it would funnel through them and they get 2%. Well, then some of those decided to become legitimate, and they had to go back through their logs. And you probably remember that in the early 2000s or the late 90s.
And so get this. So there's this oligarch that's the president that's there. And of course, he can't come to the United States. It's the one that we wouldn't let in. And he's, saying he's going to need this for Ukraine. And so we put 1.8 billion into the bank. And lo and behold, it disappeared, folks. So it disappeared. So we still had to have this bank, or the administration, the Obama administration.
Well, the bank was going insolvent, right? And they had these outstanding loans that weren't being paid, and so that 1.8 million just went in and paid that stuff that we don't even know what it is.
Yeah, and then so they gave them an additional 2.8 billion because of what happened. But it was a different president, a different oligarch, and I believe it's the one before Zelensky that did the same thing. And then
Poroshenko.
I believe so.
Yeah,
I
Portia.
didn't grab. I tried not to grab so many names and stuff, but I should have. No, but they were also um, they went and said we now need to put some of our people over in charge of some of these banks. And Obama wanted to get his foot in the door with the banks. So the banks that he had invested in, because the Bidens invested in it, the Clintons did, we heard this other guy did, um, the oligarchs did. So we decided we needed to send him some advisors. So that was Greg Craig. Now, he was a former White House counsel. There was Tad Devine, chief strategist for Bernie Sanders, Tony and John Podesta. They also sent Mark Penn. He was a chief strategist for Hillary Clinton. Now, um, also John Ellison. He was a campaign pollster, um, and there was like two others, but they were Hillary
Valerie
lawyers.
Jarrett, Susan Rice.
Yeah. Well, not really all them. It was more these advisors were set because they're not really well known, William, but they could control the money of not only campaigns to pitch in over there, but then the aid.
Well, Valerie Jarrett had a history in Iran, so they used
Right.
her for that.
They did. Um, Not only that, but uh, that was 2016. End of 2016, we started seeing Robert Mueller showing up with Brennan and Clapper and what was his name, the head of FBI, Comey. And so they go over there and they're saying we're looking at the oligarch stuff. Now, mind you, the CIA is there, folks. But the thing about this is you're not, don't look behind me. Don't look what is over here with these chem labs. Don't look at Burisma. Don't look at up in Kiev and the surrounding areas where they have now all bought into that main pipeline, the one that goes through Ukraine, William?
Yeah, Nord Stream 1 went
Right.
through Ukraine.
Uh-huh. So that's what they were all investing in. And so they were hoping that, to me, William, this starting to sound like a takeover. You got your banks, you got your labs, you got your.
Ukraine got a percentage of the profits from the liquid natural gas that transited its country going into Europe, and so those dollars were very coveted.
Right. So this is what kind of when all that Russia stuff came out on Trump, and then of course we had to have Mueller look into investigating not only Trump, but had to prove some stuff with the DNC. Well, that's where they brought in a lady named Chalupa. Do you remember her?
Chalupa, yeah.
Yeah. I know it sounds like Taco Bell, but she was the daughter of a Ukrainian immigrant. And she began right after she was hired doing opposition research. Now, but she worked for Newland, and it goes back to if we look at what Newland had been doing. So she was working with Newland, they say, since 2003. She did a stint with them.
You have to keep in mind, Ellie, it's not just individuals. These are entire groups that are working together. They're doing research, they're doing analytics, they're doing systems analysis. That's where they found Manafort and strategy. And so there's an entire office
that's where
of these people. And
that's where Miss Sue comes from too. He had a lot of stuff, but now I'll get this. So Chalupa is basically a connection for the State Department. So this, like you said, a group for the State Department to connect up with Ukraine in 2003. And this was under Cheney. Um, and then I was reading earlier to William about she did 2 tours at NATO. So she's part of NATO. She was in Brussels. She even served overseas in where? Russia, China, and Mongolia. So they had their foot in the door, not only in Ukraine, right? But the thing is she was worked for Hillary Clinton. Um, so, but
So what happened was they put her in NATO. There were lots of nuclear devices being sold on the black market at that time, right?
Right.
And so wherever that money came from to buy those devices, so we'd go in and grab those up. So the military or I would grab those up. We would get them out of the way, either over to Russia to take care of them and steward them, or they would have to come to the United States, right? Go under DOE. But the people that were buying and selling this stuff on the black market had really deep pockets. So that gave all these people an opportunity to chase the money back to these oligarchs where they could bleed them dry.
Well, now once Trump went in office, the oligarchs fled. There was like 10 of them. And of course, we're going to go. Well, we're going to go get them. Well, they were gone, but at the same time, we have got. They were opening the banks, the farm labs, big pharma labs, nuclear labs, plus giving millions to Ukraine government, paid to create a setup that Ukraine would be paid millions to billions every year. That's why Obama says, well, I'll give them a blanket, because we're already giving them millions and billions of dollars. And what does the media do? Hey, it's all about the election. Now, aren't they doing it now when there's so much going on in Ukraine? Because the Democrats cannot let this war stop. Because if it does, a lot of this will be uncovered.
Well, and they won't be able to run into the future because that's where that's
right. And so Chalupa
and Obama's, they were poor as church mice when they came into office. They left poor as church mice, and now they've got multiple homes, live in Nantucket, live up in the high rent society there out of New York City. Right. Where did all this cash come from? Well, they saw this stuff going on, and then as soon as they got out of office, they ran and, bled these oligarchs dry.
And they're even saying about this time is when Hillary was selling uranium to Russia. But come to find out, there was a lot of uranium being sold to Iran and Ukraine, and a lot of it going to China. So
it wasn't enriched uranium. This is just ore, right, by the way, guys.
Right. So, and this is all during going into the Trump years, but Obama was still going. Obama and his what he invested in, and the boards that he was on, or being a lobbyist or anything like that. He had ties to Ukraine going through into Trump years.
Right. Remember, before Trump came into office, you probably heard in the news a lot of time about interlocking boards of directors. That's what they're talking about here. So all these, and they would not just companies in the United States, but they also had boards of directors in these other countries where they're now setting up shop, right? Unilever or Colgate or whoever, right? Tylenol, it's endless. And these interlocking boards of directors are directing this stuff, and at the same time, you've got NGOs and you've got senators and you've got lobbyists. They're going and collecting up the scraps balls. It was literally a feeding frenzy.
Well, and if you do stuff like, and see, everybody start getting foundations like Open Society, because if they gave money, they could get the money. You know, they get, you know, they only have to give 25%. The rest they can take home to mama. You know, so that's what these. I mean, that's a luxury. But I hate to tell you,
And,
folks, even your some of the well-known foundations that collect to help people, you know, kids in need, or I can't even think some of the names of them. They do the same
so
thing.
Ellie, they had these think tanks, okay, and the think tanks had to be funded. Well, this is where the funding came from. Whether you're a conservative think tank or whether you're a liberal think tank, right?
Mm-hmm.
The money to run those weren't coming from individuals and corporations. They were, in effect, coming from tax dollars and foreign aid. So it was keeping unknown hundreds and thousands even of these intellectual strategists, right, who knew all about foreign policy. Remember the brain drain? Well, the brain drain was coming to these think tanks, and it gave them more and more power within the administration, because they could make an argument in court with a think tank, right, that if you did this, this, and this, it would be better than if you did this, that, and the other, right? But it just happened to be this other towards us. There's a way for us to make a money stream in it. But they would be able to use the think tank to give them credibility so that they would have plausible deniability.
Yeah, and then after the Ukrainians fled to Crimea, the ones that were Russians, Ukraine hit the United States up.
The professors and stuff in these think tanks, they didn't know where the money was coming from. They just thought it was coming from corporations.
Yeah,
so
millions.
These aren't bad guys. They're
right.
Academics that lobbyists could use in front of Congress to get their way, right? Because they were the super intellectual on that specific subject, and so they were honest in the work they did, okay. But the funding that cared for them, it was being generated out in the Wild West, and so once the Soviet Union started to settle down, guess what? When we had the Arab Spring, we started the Wild West again.
Yeah, and so once Trump got in there, they had to make sure that they had the foundations in order. Now, it happens that when let me set the scenario up. Biden's son needed $500,000 for the pipeline. Well, of course, they couldn't get the money. It's kind of like Zelensky does. He goes around, but the United States was willing to give Joe Biden, our tax money, or Hunter Biden, $500,000 for Burisma. This is when him and Archer and all that. But it was an additional $1.8 billion that went into a bank that was pretty much owned and operated by James Biden. That's his brother, okay? This is where they're all getting tied up. But see, we're looking at China, folks. We haven't even started to look.
We pumped money into those banks to make them solvent, right? So
yeah.
that Southern Europe didn't collapse. Well, now we're doing the same thing here, but some of that money is being targeted towards Hunter.
Right. But see, Burisma is just a small part of it, because they were pumping things in, and it would, under the guise that it would help Ukraine. But see, they had to get a better president in, and that's where Zelensky comes in, because they knew Zelensky would buy and get military equipment. And so that was the biggest pump going into close to 2017-18, where Ukraine was buying a massive amount of military for the Azov battalion. And when you look at that, they were kind of putting them in charge. but this is like a vicious MS-13 gang. Um, so they started funding them, William, and that's pretty much when all the oligarchs said, "We're out of here." Um, Trump put in another corrupt um, office to go after the other three that have all since been corrupted, and looking into past presidents. But see, the thing is, when the $1.8 billion went in to this bank, it was supposed to have been for Ukraine, but it disappeared. So look at how much money that was put into the banks that was controlled by somebody, either by the State Department or Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or um, uh, uh, Miss Chalupa and Miss Newland. Every time there was the monies would go through these banks, it would just disappear, and nobody knew what happened to it.
Don't forget things like Lehman Brothers and stuff like that. They had outstanding loans in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these banks had that got money so that they could stay solvent was because they'd made bad bets.
Right.
In these new
and
Russian
you know when
territories.
they asked oh, what's his name, Sullivan, because he was a lawyer. Yeah, he was a big part of him and the Podesta brothers and the others I had mentioned. Well, then Sullivan climbs aboard, and they're going to look at the corruption in Ukraine, and they couldn't really see much. They said really not much was going on, but they couldn't find the billions and billions of dollars that had disappeared. And that's when, of course, Sullivan, and he wasn't anything much at that time, but a Hillary lawyer. And after their investigation, then with him, the FBI and the CIA, not to see here, there, we have to let this 1.8 billion dollars that disappeared, the 2.8 billion that disappeared, and then when they started looking, that's when they started looking at Burisma, because that's when he said, I'll fire that. I'll fire him. I'm going to fire that investigator. Why? Because he was put in charge to start looking at Burisma and all these banks, these labs. And of course, he was fired. Along with, get this, 5 mil to a bribery that came out in a phone call, but that wasn't the first one. There was supposedly 8, it was oligarchs, some of the labs, some of up in Kiev, kind of like their defense, Kiev's defense.
Remember when we catch these discrepancies, these are the tip of icebergs. So you're seeing this little transaction, but there have been thousands of transactions before that, right?
Right. Grassi knows all about this. This is the stuff Grassi has, and also Giuliani, because Giuliani went over there too. And Giuliani, he took as many pictures as he could, and that's where we see Schumer and Schiff and Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin and more of the State Department, the Department of Justice, and everybody started going over there. And that was in between 2016 and 2020 that they all started going over there, and they were getting caught.
Remember, John Kerry was going to Iran and a bunch of other countries the entire time. When
North Korea,
and he was just doing it on his own. He's freelancing.
Yeah, and so was Hillary. But by the time Hillary got done with North Korea, Kim Jong-un was in a tizzy, and that's where we sent what's his name, the basketball player, over there to calm him down.
Dennis Rodman.
Yes. And then, of course, when Trump went over and talked to him, everything was cool. Well, after Trump, basically, they knew Trump was going to get out of office. There was Hillary Clinton and about 20 of her lawyers and a communications specialist that ran over there and had talk with him. And then he was all for being with China after that. I mean, that's getting way off track there, but that's what they did. So when Trump got in office, that's why I've always said that's why they had to listen to that phone call between Zelensky and Trump because they were afraid that Zelensky would turn. And they're still afraid of that. There is stuff that's coming through the Department of Justice and even to the State Department that I found out from sources that Zelensky's fixing to, if they don't keep giving him the millions and billions the way he wants it, he's gonna tell on him. He's gonna let Trump know everything going on. But Trump knows it all. He don't need Zelensky.
And remember also the time this stuff was happening, we started in the 90s, the Soviet Union fell. All of a sudden, we start getting these new leaders like Macron, like Trudeau.
We sure did.
These aren't by accident.
And we haven't even looked at what we give them for aid. How much aid are they getting? How much are they getting to help them? And how much are they getting for military? Nobody looks into that. It's the same thing over and over and over again. Just like I said at the beginning, we're giving them money for not only to our allies, but our enemies for the same thing. You know, it's just like...
So we have funding that goes into the CIA for black operations. We have money that goes into the military for black operations. There's even funds going into the State Department black operations, but they just call it something different, like USAID or USA to the UN or the World Bank.
Now look at the...
They have these mechanisms.
Now another thing is, because of World War II, I mean, Europe, Germany, and even Poland, their underground tunnels just snake forever. And I heard MI6 is a lot of over there in these countries that's doing spying.
Well, these 12 sites that they found, it wasn't just the CIA that ran them; it was MI6 as well with them.
See, that's what I was saying.
They were running shop together. They were running shop together.
Right.
They weren't independent. They were tied to each other. They're seeing each other every day. They're looking at the same data. They're making decisions based on what each other thought.
And we know that I think it was Flynn that came out that said, when I believe it was when they were in Iraq and they were doing a reconnaissance kind of thing to find out about ISIS. Well, they were told about an underground CIA base, and that's what they were using. But when he came out and started talk just a little bit, all of a sudden they had him locked up, shackled, and hogtied, and they were going to get him. So it just...
Well, it's like this U.S. base in Jordan, right? We have lily pads all over the world. When these countries are willing to let us come in there and do that, we're not driving through their countries, right? We're not doing trucking through the countries. This is areas where nobody lives. And so they can make a little bit of a profit by allowing the U.S. to come in. We just do everything by air so that they don't upset their own populace. Well, this goes on. This has been going on since World War II.
It sure has. But this big thing with Ukraine, William, is it is bought by the DNC, by all these people we talked about tonight, Obama. And then Zelensky came out. Now Zelensky came out a year ago and said that the country is going to do political asylum. Well, of course, because all them people have invested in it, and if I mean, you look at everybody that's involved, William. We're talking the State Department and the DOJ, and we're talking Mr. George and Kerry and the not so much the Bush family, but Biden, their whole family, and the Clintons and their whole family. They own Ukraine. They own Ukraine, and they're trying to protect what they have been doing for the last 30, 40 years.
Keep in mind, if this thing falls, right, if this thing stops, they have to go someplace else.
They don't want to. They got themselves set up. It's a setup. But or is it? because you could start seeing the same signatures in not only Yemen, but Iran, and
Well, all these small
then
wars were
business
magical.
deals that are coming out with many. I mean, we know McConnell is over there, we know Kerry's over there, we know the Clintons are over there. The same players are all over in China doing business. They're buying into businesses, and they're getting to be top execs on some of the banking system over there, some of the military stuff that's being made. It's the same thing all over again.
Keep in mind, this isn't just money. This is blood money now.
Yes, yes, it is. Because if you talk, you're gone. Like Hillary Clinton said here in Arkansas when we start having people disappear. No witnesses. No witnesses. So, um, wow.
We
William,
probably should end this.
I could probably give you guys tons and tons and tons of. I mean, I've got oh my God, forever files. I mean, I could talk for 4 or 5 hours of the corruption of the DNC and the Democrats that's been trying to take over and get rid of the Republican Party for 100 years at least.
So what's effectively happened is you've had the CIA trying to drive foreign policy, and when they get in trouble, they're using the military to bail them out. The military doesn't know they're being used that way, right? They cause these instabilities, and governments go up in flames, and now suddenly you've got a revolution. You got this another small country. Well, this is just a boon to make more money. This is cash on the side.
Yeah. And people should know this, because if these Democrats, I don't want to say these voters are a bunch of dummies, but they say, well, I've been blue. My parents were voted blue, and we're blue, and no matter who it is, we're going to vote blue. Well, they got to take a look at what's going on. They got to start looking at the corruption. And I'm not going to place it all on the Democrat Party, because there are Republicans that just happily go along. They're like, oh, yeah, I can make a couple million over there in that country. Well, hell yeah, where do I sign? They do the same thing.
Congressmen are afraid to say anything about it for fear that big machine will attack them. Mm-hmm. And so they try to do the congressional work for their states, so they get jobs and stuff like that in their states, but they're really powerless. A lot of them feel they're powerless to stop this thing because they're not willing to go and expose the whole thing. It means personal destruction, not only of you, but of your family. If you go up against these big machines, they will destroy you, but you'll have a clear conscience.
Yeah. And I don't think enough of, I don't even think Zelensky. I think he's been bought, and he's just going to go along with it. He's got millions of dollars, or he wasn't all that rich when he started, but he's, his wife is spending millions a day on shopping.
Well, he's being strategic. He's got a number of yachts he's got now parked around the world. So if, God forbid, something happens, he can get on his yacht and go out into international water, and he's safe, right?
But if it's political, they've got political asylum there. That's the whole thing. I think that's what these people are going to do. Is if we start going after them, they're all heading to Ukraine, where it's all set up, and that's why they really don't want Putin to go any further, because they want to rebuild and make Ukraine kind of like, what is that, Dubai? I think.
Yeah, well, they're trying to protect their own interests. They're not protecting the national interest.
They could put their homes there, because they were looking at New Zealand, but then they started seeing, because Obama even went down and took a look at New Zealand. So did, what's really weird is Pence was going down there.
New Zealand is the only one in Five Eyes that has the capacity. They can allow anybody to look at what's in those intelligence networks. I mean, as far as files, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody went down there because there's that loophole that New Zealand has that nobody else has, so they could figure out what the hell was going on, so they could
So
they're not always talking to each other. These are frenemies, remember?
Yeah. So anyway, I want to wrap this up, William. We've been going for a long time, and we'll come back on other shows and tell you guys about this. But if you don't understand what this whole group, and they've got the FBI is there, it's them. So is the CIA. So is the NSA. All of this, the top people that you see, even Mayorkas and all that, you can see they're all bought and paid, and doing what Biden
you're
wants
an
to do.
FBI agent and you're sent there and you see this corruption going on, are you just going to look the other way, or are you going to have your life destroyed?
That's it. That's it. So, okay. So hopefully the election could turn things around. That's what's going to save this country is this election. So,
Well, Americans start to become aware of all this is going on. They're just, this isn't going to end, but what's going to happen is we're going to have to yank in on the reins real hard. We can't have this stuff out in the light of day. We're going to have to force it back into the shadows so that normal business and normal interactions between nations can occur. You just basically, you're not trying to remove them from society. You're just trying to say, hey, you've gone too far. We're pushing back now.
Yeah. So
quiet down a bit. Yeah.
So but get out there and vote. But subscribe and share this show. People need to hear what the DNC and the Democrat politicians have done to not only our country, but they're just going country to country, folks. And we got to let everybody know what's going on with this. And that's pretty much what Dan Bongino and a few others are trying to explain with CIA. They just haven't gone far enough like I want to. I want to tell you guys everything.
They're afraid this money train's going to come to an end. So this is where this whole carbon tax thing, carbon neutrality, and then if you use carbon, you have to pay a tax for the carbon you use.
The
carbon
new
isn't going to some poor country. That carbon tax is never going to go to some
the
poor
Green
country.
New Deal. It's all got to, because they're going to start losing their money. They got to come up with a new scam. And here we are, carbon tax and Green New Deal. And okay, that is it. I will be back Friday with. I'm gonna try for a new show, but it's definitely trivia on Friday. So William, I'm looking forward to having you come back on Monday. It gives you a few days to sit and think, and like I said, our head's spinning with lots of info coming out. So thank you, William, very much for you.
Thank you for the opportunity, because this affects military members. This affects our military, and we've got to rein this in so that we can protect our own nation. And the people wouldn't have known it if it hadn't been for this big flood coming from the south, and they wouldn't do anything to shut it down. It made a lot of Americans look up and say, what is really going on here? And then they go out and start doing research. They run into folks like us, and then they're able to make a better decision.
Okay, have a wonderful Wednesday, and we will see everyone on Friday for trivia. Thanks for watching, and subscribe and like and ring that bell so you can be notified when we're on.